This episode of the What the FinTech podcast is sponsored by GoCardless. Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of What the FinTech, the podcast from the team behind FinTech Futures and the Banking Technology magazine. My name is Paul Hindle, editor of FinTech Futures, and for this episode we're joined by Paul Foster, Director of Global Payment Partnerships at GoCardless. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you here. And just to get started, would you like to quickly let us know a little bit more about yourself and your role at GoCardless?
Perfect. I'm Paul Foster. I'm Director of Global Payment Partnerships at GoCardless. So my team's role is to manage and grow all of our global payment partner infrastructure that is core to us taking payments. So that typically includes banks, non-bank payment providers, and then the scheme and industry relationships as well. So I've been at GoCardless just over 7 years now and moved into fintech from banking. So GoCardless is an account-to-account payments platform and driving towards becoming the world's bank payment network. So we currently serve over 95,000 merchants across over 30 different countries to bring them faster, cheaper, and more secure payments.
Excellent. Sounds great. And again, it's great to have you here. And thanks so much for taking the time out to speak with us today. So on the show this week, we'll be discussing the growing adoption of open banking payments with a specific focus on GoCardless's recently published report on the topic titled How to Take Open Banking Payments Mainstream. We'll dive into the current trends and use cases driving the growth of open banking payments, the benefits of open banking payments for consumers and businesses, and the challenges of achieving widespread adoption and what practical steps are needed in order for open banking payments to really hit the mainstream. That's all to come shortly, but as always, we'll open with our news in numbers segment. So this is where our guest has gone out and found a news story featuring an interesting number to discuss and get us started. So, Paul, what have you brought along for us today?
So I brought a stat from the report itself, so I've cheated, but it's a really interesting stat. So 1/4 of merchants say that open banking payments is already one of their most important payment methods. And honestly, I love that stat because it was genuinely higher than I actually expected. So whilst the volume continues to grow, we see a lot of the narrative, which is still that open banking is fairly nascent. So to hear from execs and people who have responsibility over their payment acceptance decisions saying that this is already core to their payment mix is a really strong message and actually underlines that there's already a strong foundation for open banking payments.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I mean, let's just dive straight into the report then. I mean, just to get started then and maybe some extra context, I mean, what were the key drivers behind GoCardless commissioning this report then?
Yeah, great question. So as a business, we spend lots of time with merchants listening to the different industries and segments around what's important to them, what's important to their payment mix, particularly the drivers and barriers to adopting open banking. So the report felt like a bit of a natural continuation of that process. And by commissioning 11FS to create the report, it allowed us to avoid the classic groupthink pitfall and really hear the problems in a real world environment. So if we look at the history of open banking, it's pretty much been one around a bit of hype, if I'm honest with you. And if we were to look back, there's been some pretty wild predictions as to where we would be today versus where we actually are. And although some of them are still really bullish, what we wanted to see is a really grown-up report that looked at open banking, warts and all, to see what would be some sensible suggestions around how we could actually bring that to the mainstream. And that's really what led us to take a merchant-specific focus. So we often find that merchants are a key part of driving open banking, but often excluded from the actual conversations. We're having lots of conversations with the industry, with regulators, and it's important that we use this report now to actually reflect some of those opinions from the merchants directly into those conversations.
Excellent. Great. And you obviously opened with that stat then at 1/4 of merchants saying that open banking payments are already one of their most important payment methods. And if we were to look across sectors in the UK, then how would you sum up the current state of play with open banking payments then?
So I think we've reached a fairly pivotal point for open banking at the moment. Like we've seen some great success. If you look at the stats from the Open Banking Limited website, etc., like we've got over 20 million payments per month now going through the open banking rails. But there's still some widespread adoption issues, and the report itself flags 6 particular ones. But the one I'd pull out from that 6 is the commercial model. And that's really the thing right now that's sort of causing a bit of stagnation in our progress, if I'm honest. So what we need is for everybody to be on the same page and pushing in the same direction. And to do that, we genuinely believe that we need a commercial model that supports all of the ecosystem. We need people to come and to invest in innovation, invest in the product to make it the best fit that it can be. And that's what will ultimately drive the adoption.
I guess what kind of general trends then are you seeing as well in terms of that adoption? Which sectors maybe are seeing the most activity at the moment?
Yeah, that's another good question. So GoCardless, we process over $40 billion a year in payments. And I mentioned before, we have like 95,000 merchants. So I'd like to think that we get a good wide overview of some of the trends coming through. And maybe this is be what people expect, but right now we're seeing that the early adopters are in the sort of leisure financial services sector, particularly like gambling, credit and lending type entities. It looks like the next wave of that will be media, gaming, utilities and government. And a lot of those are captured into what is going to be wave one of the variable recurring payments. And then where we probably will see later adoption is into like retail and hospitality. And the reason for that is some of the gaps in the product right now, which just genuinely can't serve that sector as well as some of the alternatives.
Excellent. And I mean, for the report, you obviously spoke with a lot of businesses that currently use open banking payments. And I mean, what were their thoughts in terms of factors like usability and ease of integration?
I mean, just over half of the merchants who contributed to the report are actually using open banking payments at the moment, whether right now or in the past. And unfortunately, a key theme that came through was that a lot of them are experiencing a sort of range of problems. Some of those particularly were, like you say, the actual user experience, payer preference, education, etc. And that's probably not surprising. It's a new payment method, and we would expect there to be a slow educational process and uptick in that. But the good news is that the industry really is trying to push in the right direction to solve some of those problems. So we see some of those areas, for example, one being the payment certainty, which is a particular problem when you get to the point of sale type use cases, which going back to the sort of late adopters in hospitality, etc., would be sort of essential to them. And Pay.uk are already working on that type of functionality. So it's great to see that we know what some of the problems are. I think the report itself really highlighted directly from merchants what they are, and that the industry is thinking about how to solve them.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I guess building on that front, then how much of a challenge is getting the word out there then about open banking payments, the potential benefits, and how have you looked to approach boosting kind of business and consumer education around this at GoCardless as well?
Yeah, so educating merchants and payers and getting the message out is absolutely a problem. So if we look at the report itself, 1 in 5 businesses have said that greater customer awareness would encourage them to actually offer this as a payment method. So of the users and the businesses that we deal with, we prioritize trying to provide merchant-facing insights and thought leadership. So how that looks at GoCardless is we offer content via webinars, blogs, reports, all of which can be found on our website. And what we want to actually do is create and share those insights specifically around open banking. So we've worked closely with obviously 11FS on this report, but we've also looked around the wider payer adoption. So there was another report that we were part of, which is called Demystifying Payer Experience Report. And that surveyed 1,000 customers to look at and understand how and why payers select particular payment methods, for example, open banking. And the final one I would say, because we're taking a merchant focus here, is that we've partnered with the Federation of Small Business, and we've actually sponsored their Late Payments Hub, which provides educational pieces on different payment methods to new and small businesses across the UK. And they will be the businesses that ultimately we need to engage if we want to create adoption in any of the payment methods.
And I mean, one of the key drivers, as you mentioned, for new payment methods is that customer experience then. I mean, maybe we can dive into that a little bit more. I mean, what were some of the key takeaways then from the report around that? And I guess what's the next steps there?
Yeah, so the key takeaway really is that customer experience in open banking needs to be better than it currently is at the moment. And I think the report itself highlighted 5 factors which are currently detrimental to that customer experience. So just picking on all those quickly, there's the need for strong customer authentication, not just for high value payments or high risk payments, which you don't see in other products like cards. The payment experience is inconsistent. So the payment journey that somebody goes through depends on the bank that they're currently with. The banking APIs can be inconsistent, which erodes confidence and trust. Payers don't always receive a failure notification, which can leave them waiting in limbo. that's a problem when we look at some of those future use cases. And there's no particular customer protection at present. So the GoCardless and the wider industry are really looking to address those problems. So we're working with the banks, we're working with Pay.UK to improve the infrastructure and create that consistent payment confirmation, as I mentioned before. And we're also looking to build better processes for merchants. So simple refund processes using faster payments and account data, for instance. And finally, the sort of utopia for everybody is unlocking the pay by bank at the point of sale.
Excellent. Yeah. And I mean, I guess from the report as well, were there any other challenges and hurdles that exist for that mainstream adoption of open banking payments that really stood out to you?
Yeah, so I think outside of the customer experience, there's probably three key factors that are impacting adoption that I'd call out, and they're coverage, cost, and conversion. So we expect to see the regulator address the coverage point. It's highly likely that they will mandate the coverage element, certainly for variable recurring payments. With respect to cost, it sort of comes back to the point I was raising before about the commercial barriers. So right now, everything that's been built is being built around the CMA order, and that was something that the banks couldn't charge for. So if we want to see the investment and innovation come in, then we need to have that cost, which is not too prohibitive to the merchant or the end user, but also provides value to those in the ecosystem to make sure that they're providing the best products that competes with those alternatives. And then the last one around conversion. So we conducted some previous research that suggested card payments fail between sort of 10 to 15% of the time. And if they fail, only 62% of payers then retry the checkout experience. So there's a real opportunity for open banking to provide a smooth and consistent, reliable flow. And if they can improve on those conversion rates, then absolutely it can provide a legitimate alternative. And I've seen some quotes say that success rate for open banking can be as high as 95% as a comparison point.
Excellent. And I guess building on that, then, so if you were to sum things up, looking at the benefits, and why should businesses adopt open banking payments in today, and what are the key benefits that are in it for them?
Yeah, great. I mean, I could give you my answer, but actually I think the stronger answer comes from the report and one of the merchant quotes in it. So there's a great quote from Oliver Shaw-Latimer from Just Giving, who calls out that open banking has addressed almost all of their card payment issues. So he had a list that includes card fraud, chargebacks, refunds and refund requests, processing costs, and just the speed of Just Giving getting their money from the acquirer. So, I mean, these are going to be common problems across the industry. And if somebody like Just Giving is saying that this open banking has the potential to solve those problems, then we really think that is ultimately where the success is going to come in the future for all types of merchants. And that's what really buys us into the fact that open banking is solving a problem rather than looking for a problem.
Excellent. Then you obviously mentioned the potential benefits over card payments, but given how familiar people are with cards as almost the de facto payment method now, I mean, can open banking realistically compete with other payment methods like cards be treated as a mainstream payment method?
So we certainly believe that open banking can be a genuine alternative, especially for cards. And I'd actually take that a step further and say that I think it needs to be an alternative to cards. So the Gartner review specifically identified that open banking was the best way to introduce competition to cards. And we absolutely support that view. To become mainstream, though, I mean, there is definitely some gaps here right now. And education is one of those key elements that you've highlighted. I think if we look at cards specifically, everybody recognizes the Visa and MasterCard logos. And the report itself identifies that we need a recognizable brand for open banking in order for merchants to build trust and payers to build trust. So there was 3 key steps that were called out in the report. One of those is to define and agree a term for the payment method, which is commonly used across the industry. Like we see a number of different terms used, but we need something that everybody can quickly recognize. To create a common brand and logo, very similar to how cards have done with contactless. And then to create some central governance standards, which is ultimately there to build the trust and credibility for open banking itself.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, the UK has been a pioneer in the open banking space globally. I mean, does the country need to change its approach to drive this next phase of growth for the technology?
So it's great that we've been a pioneer in the UK, and I think that's used a lot, but I think others are overtaking us now. So what I would say is, do we need to change our approach? Yes, in the sense that we need to speed things up and we need to be more specific with our intentions around open banking. So there's a lot of great work happening in the industry. There's a lot of great work happening on the regulatory space So there's the Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee, JROC, that has done a lot of work around the next phase of open banking, etc. But what we're seeing is big gaps between the next phase of the progress. And I think if the UK really wants to stay at the forefront of open banking and that innovation piece, then it has to move faster than it's moving at the moment. And that's certainly an element that we're looking to really use our voice as one of the big providers in the market to push that agenda.
And I guess looking to the future then, I mean, what do you think will happen over the next few years then in the open banking space? What practical steps need to happen for it to reach this mainstream status? And then how are you at GoCardless well preparing and working towards that future?
Yeah, so we absolutely expect over the next 5 years that hopefully open banking will become a mainstream payment method. And if we can address some of the key adoption barriers we've touched on before, then absolutely open banking has a space in everybody's payment mix. If we look at some of the international comparisons, I mean, PIX in Brazil or UPI in India have shown the huge potential of bank payments if that product is delivered well. So I would say that we expect to see additional products created using open banking rails over that period as well. So the combination of account data with payment initiation is a really strong proposition for merchants to solve problems again that they see are commonplace. And we're also likely to see big tech have a say in the overall success, right? So we've seen Uber embrace bank payments in markets like Australia, US, and Japan. And if they see the potential in the UK, alongside like the Amazons or Apples of the world, then that's the real sort of potential hero use case that we need to massively move this forward. So the last part of that question was how are GoCardless preparing? And I guess I'll cop out a little bit and say that actually we've been preparing for a long time now. So we were part of the initial sandbox for open banking back in 2018, taking the first variable recurring payment. We acquired a business in 2022, which was all around the account information infrastructure, because we see how those two things sit very closely next to each other. And for us, we're just going to continue to use our voice in the industry to make sure that we can really shape the direction of travel in these areas. And having anecdotal evidence like the merchant quotes from the report will really help us do that in a tangible way.
Thanks again, Paul, for chatting with us today. I mean, to close out the podcast, we have our now infamous Fintech Jails. This is where we ask for an industry term, buzzword, or trend that you've seen or heard enough of. Or, of course, you can advocate to free one of the previously incarcerated terms. So what would your selection be for this week?
So I'm proposing a prisoner swap, if that's okay. So I'm planning on putting one in and taking one out. So I'm proposing that we put in VRP as a term. I mean, really, we could say acronyms in general belong in the jail because financial services is too acronym heavy. But the amount of time I use VRP, and even if I say variable recurring payments, people just don't really understand what I'm talking about. And that's not just sort of in my household, that's if I'm talking to people in the business as well. So I think this comes back to that question around what do we need to do to make people understand and trust this. And it comes down to the branding of open banking generally. So that's why I'm putting VRP into the jail. The one I'm proposing to trade for is banks. So on one of the previous podcasts, someone put banks in for a specific reason, but I'm taking them out because we very much need them for open banking to be success. So everybody looks at banks sometimes in fintech and blames them for various things, but they're going to be such an important part of delivering a successful product. We need them to be investing. That comes back to the commercial model. We need them to be understanding some of the merchant and payer problems. That comes back to the industry education piece. And if we can all be working in the same direction, then that's what ultimately is going to be needed for this to be a successful payment method.
Excellent. Yeah, I think a prisoner swap is a good idea. Like I said, we've been going for 5 series now, so it's getting quite full in the jail. So maybe prisoner swaps going forward might be the way to go. So, I mean, banks has been in for a long time as well. So it's probably a good idea to break that one out now because at the end of the day, we all need banks. So it's probably good to get that one out of the jail. Yeah, so VRP going in, but so not variable recurring payments as a thing itself, but just the acronym, right? You think maybe having too many acronyms makes it harder. I mean, we've been talking a lot about education over the course of this, but having too many maybe just kind of muddies the waters a bit there, right?
Absolutely. Definitely acronyms.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I think you've made a good argument there and across the course of the episode as well. So I'm more than happy to throw VRP into the jail then this week and, of course, let banks out as well as part of that prisoner swap. So, Paul, again, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks, of course, to Paul for joining me. As for FinTech Futures, you can find us online at fintechfutures.com, on X at FinTech Futures, and, of course, on LinkedIn. If you like this podcast and our other episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcasting service to get notified about future episodes. Thanks as well to Arama for editing this podcast. You can check them out at arama.tv. As always, thank you very much for your support, and we'll see you soon for another episode of What the FinTech. But until then, goodbye.